right, a little bit about me. My name is Tim. I've been working with InsightWorks for about 15 years, and I design and build apps and solutions in the manufacturing space. Now, I'm here to mostly help you find solutions for apps and technology that are in the manufacturing ecosystem. All right, a little bit about this session. So in this session, we're going to do a quick review of Graphical Scheduler, and we're going to do a quick review of some concepts and terminology and how we're going to use that. We're going to go through some configuration examples, and as time allows, we're going to go through 3 different code examples. Now, we're not going to step you through each little bit of code. Instead, what we're going to do is we're giving you full working example code, and we're going to highlight the key portions in that example code of what you can do. Now, you're going to have access to all of the code for all of these sessions from TechWorks, and they're also available in our external examples Git. Now, the skills required for this session, so you will need some technical knowledge for this session. And for the last portion, there is some development knowledge required. Now, if you are a technical consultant, but not a developer, you still can get some value out of this session just by having an understanding of some of the things that you can extend with Graphical Scheduler. And of course, you will need a general understanding of the concepts within Business Central that we're using. So for example, we're going to be showing production orders in the session. And in this session, we're not really going to review what a production order is or anything of that nature in this particular session. Okay, the tools we're going to use. So we will be using Business Central. And you can use it in a container on a VM. And we will be using VS Code and, of course, Graphical Scheduler itself. Now, if you are following along, feel free to start your VM and log into it if you haven't already. We will be going over where these paths are in your TechWorks VM. And if you just want to look at this code offline, here's the link to our external repo where all of the code for these sessions can be downloaded at any point in time. Okay, so what is Graphical Scheduler? So this is basically what we're looking at right now. So it's effectively a Gantt chart, and it's typically showing manufacturing kind of data. So in this case, we're showing some data from the MX APS scheduling engine, and then also we're mixing in some shift data from another system. Now, typically it's showing production data, but you could show data from other data sources, such as sales orders or service orders or things of that nature. Really what's going to happen, though, is on the left-hand side, this is really showing you where that data resides. The top is showing you the time of where it resides. And in the middle, this is showing you the what. So all of these cells are the basically coming in from data that occurs at the intersection of the time and the where. All right. So really what this is composed of is you can have multiple views, and each view can have different styles. Each view can also have different data sources with different filters and different times and different zooms. So for example, you can have a really detailed schedule showing you perhaps maybe the current day in detail or maybe just a week in detail. And you might have maybe a less granular version showing you multiple months at maybe a higher scale. You could also perhaps on a detail scale look at things like shift level, whereas if you're looking at something like multiple months at a time, you're probably not going to be looking at things like shift level detail or individual capacity rolled up into particular days. Within it, each data source is going to be fetching data from any kind of table, and each data source is configured to use the tree. This is the tree on the left-hand side where the where is, and you can mix and match trees as well, all within the same view. So if we put that all together, the tree is the vertical categorization, that's the where. The data source is what produces all of these cells. A cell template is going to define how it looks inside of the cell. So that's the contents that go inside of it. The tooltip template is going to determine what goes when you hover over one of the cells. All of the styles, so the colors, the fonts, and things of that nature, these are all based on the table in the data source. And a view is something that kind of packages all of that together. And again, you can have multiple views with a variety of different configurations. All right, so there's many ways to extend the behavior. So the first way is with configuration. And if your primary goal is really just to plot something on the graphical scheduler that is maybe in a custom table, or maybe an existing table that already has a time, you can usually just do that through configuration. So you rarely need to have code to solve that problem. The contents of the cells, so what goes inside of the cell, the tooltip templates, the colors, or even just different layouts or views, all of that is also all configuration. Now, if you want to extend it, you can, and you can extend it with code. So we've got a large variety of hooks that allow you to alter the existing behavior. You can also provide your own custom provider completely for very complex data, or for data that doesn't necessarily actually exist in a table form. So a good example there would be some kind of data that you're maybe rolling up, or some other kind of data that you're generating on the fly, right? But you still want to maybe graph as if it were something that was occurring at that time in a particular location. The other thing you could do is you can make your own navigational tree with just a little bit of JSON generation, and you can also embed the scheduler and start the scheduler in your own code. We have a lot of documentation available, so this is all on our knowledge base, and we've also got a lot of external examples available, including the ones that we're actually going to review today. All right, so to get started, we're going to quickly review how you can do multiple views, how we can use the anything provider, how we can use cell templates and tooltip templates, and how we can use configurable colors. So we're going to start off with our graphical scheduler. Okay. Now our graphical scheduler is by default showing us what's in our default view. And if you have one that's named the same as your user ID, it's going to start off with that particular default view. And if it doesn't have one, then it's going to create one and use one that's literally just called default. So this gives the ability for different schedulers or different planners to basically always start the graphical scheduler with something that's relevant to them. You can also create your own version of something. So if somebody else has made a view and you want to see it, but maybe look at the data slightly differently, you can always just take that other view, save it as your own view, and then you can add your tweaks in there, and then your view will automatically start up as well. Now, this is just for starting graphical scheduler directly, because if you create your own page and you want to embed the graphical scheduler in it, you can always just start with any specific view as well. So you can create different views. So if I wanted to say just create my own view, I can simply just go save as, and then I can go my current view or my default view. And then what that's going to do is it's just created one here called BC TechWorks, because that's the name of my user ID. And now whenever I start graphical scheduler, it's going to start with this view instead. All right, so it's that simple to create your own view. Now, different views can show different data or even different perspectives data. So for example, today's schedule, or maybe one showing a high-level schedule, or maybe one showing a detailed schedule, or things of that nature. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new view. So we're going to head to our view button, and we're going to choose new view. And let's just call this example. My example view. Now, when you create a new view, it's going to automatically presume that you probably want to show production order related data. So it's going to show production order routing line data. But instead, what we're going to do in this case is we're going to show something else. So let's say that we want to maybe show service orders. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to choose add a data source. And in the add a data source, what we're going to do is we're going to choose this anything option. So we're going to choose anything. And now we get to choose the table and how that relates back to the scheduler itself. So if you remember back to the first slide, we had the where, that's the vertical categorization, the when, that's where it fits across, the length, and then finally the what, and that's what goes on the inside in terms of the cells. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the table for, let's choose service orders. Okay, and then we're going to choose that service header. And in this case, the system happened to realize what I was trying to do, and it wanted to automatically configure some fields. But our next section is really to help determine the starting date, and if you have an ending date, then also the ending date, right? So all we need to do is we just need to choose the date that we want for the starting date, and then of course the ending date. If all you have is a starting date, you can just fill in just that, and that'll still be enough to get the scheduler to render something on the cell. The next step after that is to choose where is it. So this is the vertical categorization. Now in this case, it decided that it should show in the miscellaneous provider. So the miscellaneous provider is just a way to really group by anything. So it's a nice single flat level. And we're going to choose the miscellaneous provider. And for the capacity number, this is really just the left-hand side organization. So we're going to choose instead not the customer, but let's choose the location code. Now, if you wanted to, you could also enable writing changes. Right for now, we're not going to do that. But if you did want to allow writing changes, you would simply choose allow writes. You get to choose how you want to validate it. And you can also choose the order of the fields and which fields that you want to write as well. We're going to leave this read-only for now. Okay, so if we back out of there, we can now see this view filtered on here, which is showing us the service orders. And I'm just going to delete this automatically created production order routing line one. So now, if I show my service orders, and I just choose my example view. Now, I think we've got some more orders back in August and September, so let's just back up a little bit. And let's see what we have. There we go. Okay, so now we can see our service orders. So with just a little bit of configuration, we were able to basically configure another table completely that the graphical scheduler doesn't necessarily show out of box, but you could basically plot it in the system. Now, what you can also do is, let's say that we wanted to identify a particularly important customer. So for example, let's drill into the details for this. You'll also notice that you didn't have to connect anything up for the page. It just automatically showed the right form. But let's say that we want to identify this particular customer as being extra important. So anytime that perhaps we want, let's just maybe zoom in a little bit more. So perhaps anytime that we have this customer showing, we maybe want it to be a different color. So to do that, we're just going to navigate back to our view. We're going to edit our view. And in this section on the bottom, configure styles in this view, what we're going to do So we're just going to open it up. And we will give it a name to start with. So we'll call this important customer. If you wanted to, you could put in a filter. So we could, as an example, customer number, build to customer probably. There we go. And I can say whenever it's this very important color or very important customer, I would like it to be highlighted in, let's say, dark orange text on a yellow background. And perhaps we also want to have the border to be bright green. Okay, so now we've got a style applied. So if we want to see that in action, then we can scroll over to see our customer. And we can now see that any service orders for that customer are now highlighted in that very bright color. Okay, well, that's great. So what if we wanted to adjust the text? So to do that, we just head over to our view. We're going to choose Edit Our View. And you can just choose Cell Template or Tooltip Template, or you can even edit it inside of here. But the format is pretty straightforward. Really all it is the cell template is what goes inside of the box, and the tooltip template is what goes into the box that occurs when you hover over that cell. So let's try that as an example. So we saw the service order being shown. Let's now maybe show the customer number as well. And we could maybe even do something like customer here. Now the fields you can add are any field in the system. So if you had your own per tenant extension that was adding your own custom field, you can use it inside of here. Okay, and for the tooltip template, we're going to do the same thing. So we're just going to say the customer is, let's add in the build to customer. And let's perhaps add in some other details. So let's see what else might be interesting on here. Perhaps we could do a location is the location code. We'll choose close. And let's see the impacts of this. So now that we've changed the cell template and the tooltip template, we can now see that it's now including the service order number as well as the customer number, and our tooltip now includes also the location. Now making it writable is just as easy. So all we need to do there is we just need to go back to our view. We can choose edit. We're going to reconfigure this, and we're going to say allowing changes. So we're going to allow writes. We're going to allow validates. And now you can choose the order of the fields that you want to validate, including custom fields. Now, let's say that you only wanted to allow change in the location, right? So that would be the capacity number. You could say just the capacity number could change. So let's say that you had an order with the same due date on maybe some kind of document, and you wanted to change the resource allocation, but not the time. Then you would just simply put in the capacity number, and that would allow you to move vertically, but not horizontally. Conversely, if you didn't want to allow changing the capacity or the location, what you could do is you could only allow changing, say, the starting date time, or depending on your code, perhaps the ending date time as well. And if you didn't want any, then you could also just set any custom value on there. Now, you could also set a custom field as well. So for example, I could just set any kind of extra custom field on there, and you could use that for very simple auditing purposes, right? So for example, say that you wanted to allow changes, but they all had to be audited or documented, then you could do that simply by choosing the capacity number and then the starting number, and then choose your field that you wanted to allow for auditing, and you could put in those details in the custom value to write. All right, so in our example, we are going to allow changing only the times, and we're going to do it such that it's the finishing date first, then the starting date. So what we're going to do is we're going to first say, first I want to change the ending date, then the starting date. All right. And now if I wanted to drag this, I can now see that it's allowing me to change that all entirely through configuration. And again, with no custom code involved for this task. All right, so let's say that that gets you most of the way there, but you also need to extend it more with code. So we do have a lot of existing events for integration events, and this allows you to change the existing behavior. You can also write your own custom provider, again, for more complex use cases. But if it's really as simple as you have a table with something that you want to categorize and it has a time, you probably don't need code for that. You can probably just use the anything provider to connect it up and plot it in the system. You could also build your own navigational tree coding it, and we're going to go through an example of that in this session. You could also do something like just embedding the scheduler and starting the scheduler as is. So an example of that would be in Business Central when you've got the Graphical Scheduler installed. There is a pick assignments feature. And the pick assignments is basically embedding the Graphical Scheduler in the system and showing you unassigned picks and giving you the opportunity to assign it, but also still allowing you to basically start with a particular view. So you notice how we're starting with showing warehouse employees and picks in the system and giving you extra actions. All right, so what can those extra actions do in the case of the pick assignments? Right, so let's just quickly review what this could do. So in this example, what you could do is you could help configure how long picks take inside of your system. So you could say something like, you know what, company-wide, minimum time per task is maybe, each pick might take, a minimum of 2 minutes, and an average time per unit is going to maybe be 1 minute or something like that. But you could also say, you know what, anytime that it is perhaps the BC TechWorks user, then it's going to be a minimum of 5 minutes. So perhaps there's one particular employee that needs extra assistance or has a special skill set, then you could change the times there. You could also choose it for particular items, right? So perhaps there's a very heavy item. So perhaps bicycles are a little bit more cumbersome to move. Perhaps they take 6 minutes per minimum, and then 2 minutes per unit. And perhaps anytime that you're using some kind of special forklift. So for perhaps anytime that you're using a lift, maybe it's a minimum of a 10-minute task, right? Now, once you've got that, you can also update your existing picks, which can then update the expected time for those picks to actually occur. Now, if you have Graphical Scheduler installed and you've already been registering your picks, especially if you've been using Warehouse Insight, you can actually have the system create recommendations for you. So if I chose create recommendations, what I can do is I can choose the warehouse activity lines that I want to look at, to analyze, and it can make recommendations for me. Now, in my case, I don't have any registered picks inside of the system for me, but it can basically generate recommendations based on your actual time that it took. And it'll fill in those values for your items, for your employees, your company, and your special equipment. So let's see this in action. So now what we're going to do is we're going to update the picks with the estimated duration. We see our 5 picks have been updated. And now we can see the estimated pick time, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and 2 minutes. So this is an example of how you can extend Graphical Scheduler with something like the pick assignments. Now the pick assignments feature is already free in Graphical Scheduler. You can just use it. It's just an example of how you can use it to embed it inside of your system. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go through an example of how you can extend this with code. And the example we're going to use is prompting for a reason, and we're just going to log a timestamp of that change whenever that change occurs. So with this, what we're going to be doing is demonstrating one particular event on before schedule change, and it's going to give an opportunity to basically intercept that. And in our case, we're going to log it. All right. So the reason for this example is it's a pretty common auditing task. If you are allowing drag and drop, is to ask the person doing the drag and drop why. So let's head into our virtual machine. We're going to open up our VS Code. We're going to open our folder for the example 1, prompt for reason code, and that's in your VM, in your TechWorks sessions, D08 Graphical Scheduler, or if you're reviewing this video after the TechWorks conference, then this is in the external repos, in the Git repo, and you'll find it inside of there. So this is a fully working example. You don't need changes to follow along. So this example is pretty straightforward, and really what we're doing is we're going to track basically any changed or anything that did change. So we're going to track who changed this. We're going to track what changed, just with a simple record ID, when it changed, and then we're just going to capture why it changed, and we're going to use simple reason code in there and also capture why. All right, so very simple table. And for navigation, we're just going to use the a built-in navigational helper that we have with the Graphical Scheduler. We have a very simple list page going to that table. So there's nothing complicated or fancy in here. And a very simple card page that also tracks this auditing for that as well. We obviously have a very simple permission set, so there's nothing interesting in here. And in our install coding, all we're doing is if you don't yet have some reason codes, it's just going to create a couple for you for demonstration. So obviously, if you're using this code, please make sure you're doing this in a development environment because we will be creating reason codes if you don't have any inside of your system. Okay, now the actual interesting bit is inside of this code unit. And this is in the event on before schedule change before data code unit. So what's happening here is we have the opportunity to track basically the original JSON object, and we get to have a copy of the JSON object before it's actually made the change. So it's updated the buffer records, but not actually made the change yet. So this gives us an opportunity to kind of intercept. And then same thing with the cell buffer. So really it's a matter of, do you prefer working with the JSON or do you prefer working with a Business Central buffer record? They'll both have the same kind of data inside of it. There's no real differentiation there. And then all we're doing is we're creating a auditing record. We're just going to track what was changed. We're just going to use the record ID that was changed. We're tracking the date, time, the user, inserting it. And then we're just going to pop open the card, which is going to ask for more details such as the actual reason code and give them an opportunity to cancel. And if they cancel, then we set the flag. All right. So we're going to publish this change. All right. And it's started up. So now all we need to do is head back to our graphical scheduler. And let's switch to our example view where we had those service orders. Let's just change our date here because I think it was the 9th that had some interesting data. Nope. Wrong year. There we go. Okay, so let's move this service order. And now we can see this code in action, right? So it's created an auditing record, and it's asking us for the reason. So we can say the reason I'm changing this service record is the staff reason code, and we can say everyone is at TechWorks 2024. I'll choose OK. Now, a fun little bit is because we have this code inside of a table that has a timestamp, we can also plot this with the anything provider. So let's do that. So we're going to head back into Business Central. We're going to go to our view. We're going to create a new view. And we'll just call this change tracking. We see it adds the default release production order routing line. We're going to ignore that for now. We're going to choose anything. We're going to put in our custom table that we just added. We're going to choose our document number, and let's choose, we'll just say who, if I wanted to show who changed something. The change itself, I'm just going to say when this changed. Notice I'm leaving the ending field blank. I'm going to show in just a miscellaneous grouping, and I'm going to group by, let's perhaps group by the Y reason. And we're going to make this read-only, so we're not going to allow changing this kind of data. We'll remove this automatically added data source, and we'll choose OK. All right. And now we can see that record that we just added, which is who changed this. So if we went back and we added in, or we made some other kind of change, so let's head back into perhaps, let's just choose our default view for now. And let's quickly just switch over to some dates with data. Okay, so now we're showing production order routing lines for September. Just change one of those as well. And we can see it just automatically pops up. So with very little code, you're able to interact with basically any view and any data source. So we're showing a mixture of data from just an anything provider, which was entirely configuration, to something more complex, such as production order routing lines. And, now I can say insufficient inventory to do this order. And I'll choose OK. Now likewise, if we now switch back into our change tracking, we'll now be able to see that second one. And if we choose details, we can see again, we didn't even have to tell the system how to open up this page. It was smart enough to figure out what the page was purely by clicking on the details. So I can see the reason here is everyone's at TechWorks. And if I click on this change tracking and go to details, I can see that I've got insufficient inventory. Now, if you really wanted to, you can get even fancier, and you can even put in those changes inside of your tooltip templates and cell templates. So let's do exactly that. We're going to simply add in the field. We're going to give the Y comment on there. And then same thing with the tooltip template. We're going to explain why simply by adding in the Y reason, and then also the Y comment. All right, we're going to close that off. Go to our change tracking. And let's perhaps just zoom in just a little bit more. Let's say that we're going to zoom into 11.1. And let's do maybe day and week. Oh, wrong year. Let's choose the right year. not 2026. All right, perfect. There's our orders. And now we can see more detail about exactly what's going on inside of the system. If we wanted to see even more detail, we simply need to zoom in as well. And choose the right year, of course. Perfect. So now you can see all of this plotted in detail, purely all through just a tiny little bit of configuration inside of your system. Now, it might also be worthwhile pointing out how you can actually also show all of this in calendar views as well. So for example, if you don't need necessarily a Gantt chart style, perhaps you just want to see all of the reasons for the changes on a calendar style view, you can definitely do that as well. Okay, now for our second example. So in our second example, what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate how you can change the layout in the organization of what shows up in the where side, so on the left-hand side. And this is done through a custom tree. Now, it's relatively simple. There's really just one method, build tree, that you really need to implement. It's through a specific interface. And there's two events that are really straightforward to basically populate. Now, when you're building your tree itself, it's a super simple JSON structure, really just with a key property, a label property, and then if you want to have subcategories, then you can have a child property or children. Now, the code for this, if you're following along, is in the D08 Graphical Scheduler folder, and it's in the example 2 folder. If you're following this after the conference, then it's just in this link available here, where all of the code is available. All right, now we're going to be looking through and analyzing a completed section of code, so you don't need to follow piece by piece. We're simply going to analyze something that was already built. Okay, so let's head back into our Visual Studio Code, and we're going to open up the second example, so the custom tree. Okay, so this is a much more straightforward project. So we have really two objects. One, just a permission set to run our code unit, and then a very simple code unit itself. Now, in the code unit, really what we have is the interface that we're implementing up here. And we have one method that we're going to implement, or sorry, one event that we're going to implement called onGetAvailableTreeProviders. So what this is when the graphical scheduler is trying to figure out what tree providers are available, it gives as an input the table that the person is trying to connect, and then it gives you an opportunity to add yourself in there. So you can add yourself in there all the time as an available option if you want, or what you can do is what I have in this example. So in my case, what I want to do is maybe reorganize by a different way of looking at the work centers and the machine centers. So, for example, if we switch over to Business Central and we start our graphical scheduler, and we start our default view, let's just change over to September. And when do we have good dates? September 17th. Let's change over to September 17th. Not 2026, 2024. Okay, so the default organization of production order work centers and machine centers that we have are going to be the work center group, the work center, and then you can see the work center and the machine centers that are part of that. But what if you wanted to organize by something different? So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate how you can organize by the the same data, but we're going to organize it by something different, like a shop calendar first. All right, and we're going to demonstrate how you don't actually need to care about the data itself. All you need to do is just describe to the system where it's going to be ordered. Okay, so this first method is really just telling the system that you do exist, and you're just saying, if I'm not already in here, then add me in, and optionally, you can decide whether or not you want to be conditional. And in our case, we want to be conditional, right? So this is an example of saying, I know that I only work with production order related data, so I want to make sure to only show myself in the list under these circumstances. The second event you need to implement is very simple. You just need to give an instance of yourself. All right. And what will happen is it's going to give a code unit reference in, and that's going to come from configuration. And then you have an opportunity to give an instance of yourself and do any other initialization that you need to do at this time. So at this point, this would be when the tree needs to be rendered, and you need to do maybe any other setup work or things of that nature. Now, in our case, we don't have any other setup work to do, so we just need to give an instance of ourself. So your code could look as simple as this, or you might need to do some other setup work as well inside of there. But you do need to implement it to give an instance of yourself. Okay, and then finally, the build tree method. Now, the build tree method comes from the interface that's at the top here. So this scheduler tree provider. And it's a very straightforward method. All you have as an input is the view itself. So you'll have access to all of the configuration that they have for the view. And you have an in and an out, which is the top level group for the rendering JSON array. So in our case, what we want to do is we want to organize by shop calendar first. So we're simply just going to find all of our shop calendars. We're going to add them in. And then the structure itself, you can see here, is just very simple. It's just going to be basically a label for the parts that we don't want to have actual nodes in. We just want them to have children. And inside of there, we're just going to go through and add all of the work centers that are part of that shop calendar into the system, as well as any work centers that may not have any shop calendars defined in them. And if we don't find any shop calendars, then we're just going to put in an empty node inside of here. And if we dig into the add work centers to tree, what we're going to see is we're adding now the label for the work center, because you can have production order routing lines associated with that work center. And our key is, for most part, this is going to be boilerplate. It's really just a string version of the record ID. Now this is going to need to map to whatever it is that your data providers are populating, but in most cases that's just going to be the record ID itself. All right. And in this case, what we're doing is we're also adding in the machine centers into that same tree. So that's basically it. Now, the children property, you optionally populate this if you are going to have child nodes. So in this case here, we do want to add in our work centers and machine centers all into that same node. And that's basically it. So our machine centers, straightforward, really just, again, adding in the label. That's however you want it to look to the human. And then the key, and that's just, again, the record ID of however it is organized that you want to organize by. So in this case here, that would be the record ID. Okay, so that is basically it. So let's publish that. Just going to publish without debugging. Okay, perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start our graphical scheduler again. we'll just change our dates here just to 9/17/24. Okay, so we've got our default layout that we have, right? So work center group, work center, and then we're seeing the work centers and machine centers inside of here. Now what we want to do is we want to use that new custom tree that we just created. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit our view. And while we're here, we're actually just going to change this to be a specific starting date on there. Okay, now on the data source side, if you just scroll all the way to the right, there's going to be a tree code unit name. Now, if it's never specified, it just presumes it's going to be the production order routing line. But what we can do is we can actually see now that we've got the built-in out-of-the-box option for the tree with work centers, the built-in out-of-the-box option for the flat list, and then also we have our example alternate machine tree, right? So this shows up because the system has given your code unit the name of the table ID of what it's trying to connect to, and your code unit then described saying, yes, I'm compatible with this. Now, if you skip that step, it's always possible to choose it anyway. So for example, if I choose show all, then I can see things that aren't going to work. So for example, I still have the ability as a human to choose something that's not compatible, like warehouse employees or things like that. So something to be cognizant of is that when you are providing that list, it's mostly just to help the human along, but it is not going to eliminate mistakes. All right, so we're going to choose our example alternate machine tree. We're going to close that off, choose OK. Okay, and now what we're seeing here is we're now actually seeing the shop calendars. So for example, I can open up that shift, and now I can see all of my work centers and machine centers populated directly in here, right? And here's my other shift inside of here. So it's another way of looking at the data. Now you'll notice I didn't have to do anything about the actual, anything about the data itself. All we had to do is just describe, well, how do we render the work centers and the machine centers, and how do we want it to lay out? And if I wanted to, I can always just switch back to that same view, or you can also mix views up as well. Or sorry, that same tree. So let's just switch back to different trees. Here's a flat one. Same data, everything's just flat. And again, you can always switch to the default tree as well at the end. Okay, so let's head back to our example alternate machine tree. So we've just seen an example of how you can easily change how things are organized on the left-hand side. And in our case, we switched it over from the work center group, work center, machine center, over to shop calendar based with relatively little code. All right. Now, for our next example, what we're going to do is go through an example of extending custom data with the anything provider. So as we've seen earlier in this presentation, it's pretty easy just to configure connecting the anything provider to practically any data source inside of the system, right? As long as you have a table that has what you want to plot, a timestamp, and where, with those 3 bits of information, you can stick it in the graphical scheduler. Now, what we're not demonstrating here is an advanced data provider. That's a little out of scope of this presentation, but just a reminder, you do also have that ability as well. So if you're trying to plot data that doesn't actually exist, maybe you're trying to plot weather data or stock data or data that doesn't necessarily exist inside of a table, or maybe data you've got to group together to infer or otherwise generate on the fly, you can still do that with a custom data provider. What we're now going to demonstrate is how can you extend the anything provider to make it a little bit easier to use for your custom table. Now, the typical use case here is if you're extending it with your own app or your own per tenant extension, and maybe you've got a custom table that has specific data that you want to integrate with, right? What you can do is you can then extend the anything provider to basically give suggestions so that it makes it a little bit easier for the person on the other end or the consultant or the user on the other end to configure it to work with your table. So we're going to work through a few different examples in here, and this one is a little more complicated, but it's going to work through the most common event subscriptions that you're going to want to integrate with. So the first one is just get suggested basic fields. This is going to help the user figure out what the best fields are for your custom table. The collect easy config, so this is going to help them with the basic configuration to get set up. So it's going to help them with basically a next finish kind of scenario. And then we're also going to actually not use a graphical scheduler event, but just a Business Central event. That can be handy. It is one that Graphical Scheduler ultimately uses to figure out which page is needed. And we're also going to go through the scenario of creating data. So we're going to go through handling a page empty click, and this can be used to help create data as well. So the examples again are going to be in the Graphical Scheduler folder on your VM, or if you're following the session after the conference, they will be available for free to download at our external repository, or you can access it through this link as well. All right, so let's head into the VM again. All right, and we're going to open up now our third example of a custom table. Okay, so this one comes with a little use case. So our use case here is you've got a custom table and it just has some data, right? So imagine your own custom table from your own app or your own extension that would have kind of similar data. And in our case, we've got a customer note. We've got 2 dates, a valid from and a valid to. Remember, you only need one to show things on the Graphical Scheduler. And we just have a comment, right? So really simple table, nothing too complex in here. We have a card page to work with that, nothing terribly interesting in here, and a notes list as well that also works with that custom table. And then likewise, just a simple permission set. So pretty boilerplate stuff so far. A generic table, generic card, generic list, generic permission set. Our install coding is going to create some sample data in that custom table. So we're just going to create some random customer data and in our customer notes table. And we'll just maybe do, let's see here. Yeah, we'll just create some for inventory count, staff retreats, special events, things like that. So just things that might be worth noting for this example use case. So something to be aware of is that it just does that when it's installing. So nothing particular to this use case, just something to kind of help you out so that you're not spending your time creating data to work with this example. Okay, now let's work through the actual interesting part. So pretty much everything is all inside of this one code unit. All right, so the first one we're going to look at here is not a Graphical Scheduler event, it's just a Business Central event, but it's a pretty useful one. And what it is it gives you the ability to basically choose which card page you want to use when it's different than what Business Central wants to supply, or if you just want to choose an explicit card page itself. So a good example of when you'd want to use this is if your record is something like the sales order table, right? So Business Central already has these built in. You don't have to really worry about it for their tables. But if you have your own table that is something like the sales header, where it can switch between like a sales order and a sales quote and a sales invoice, and it's a different card page for that based on the document type, you could implement this event and then you can use it to help the system along to figure out which card page to use. The next one is a graphical scheduler event, and it's on get suggested basic fields. And what's going to happen is when they're using the anything provider and someone's trying to connect it to a table, what you get to do is suggest things like the document number, the document line number, starting, ending, capacity type, and the suggested tree as well. Now, if you remember, this is basically the same fields that they're entering in from the anything provider configuration page. All right. So what we can do here is we just say, well, if they are trying to connect to a table that's not ours, we're just going to bail. So now everything in here, we're only going to start giving our suggestions if we are our example customer notes table. And then what's going to happen is we're going to say, well, in this case, for my example customer notes, I suggest a tree coding it. I know that I want it to be the flat provider. I want to suggest grouping by the customer number. I want my document number to also be the customer number in this case, and my starting fields and ending fields are going to be my valid from and valid to numbers. All right, so pretty straightforward. So you're just giving the system suggestions so that if they were to add in that field, it's really straightforward. All the data is filled in for them. Okay, the next one here is just simple data source insert. And what we're doing here is just if they've added the data source, what we can do is we can create example write rules. So as an example, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, well, if somebody just added a data source and that data source is to our table that we care about, and that data code unit they've connected it to is the anything provider, and it's interactive, then all we're going to do is we're just going to create some example write rules. And this isn't necessarily configuration you always need. This is just given here with the intention of giving you kind of a complete example, right? So if somebody is adding your table and you always want the maybe drag and drop enabled in that circumstance, then you can create your write rules in a way that you know is going to work. So what we're doing here is we're just saying, hey, if you've already got write rules, leave. Otherwise, create two write rules, and we're going to allow changing the starting time and ending time in here. All right. The next important the event that we're going to implement in this case is going to be the collect easy configuration. And this is basically to help the system along, especially for when it's giving options as well. All right, so this will be things like the cell template, the tooltip template, which table you should put in, and again with the data and the tree coding it. So this is where you could say, well, I want to give my option. So if we take a look at our option here, we want this to be called example customer notes. So when you click add a data source, what they're now going to be able to see is example customer notes, such that it'll now show up in that menu list, and they'll be able to choose it from the list itself. Okay, so we've got the menu label in there. Just got a simple flag that just says that we're supporting configuration, that we are going to be using the anything provider. And again, you can use your own data provider coding it completely, but in most cases that is overkill. And we know we're going to connect it with this table number, and we want the cell template to start off with the customer number and comment, and we want our tooltip template to start off with the customer number, the comment, the valid from, the valid to. Okay. And then finally, what we also want to allow, and this is the final event we're going to review before we can see all of this in action, is this on before handle empty page click. And what this is going to do is give an opportunity to add new records. All right. So what we're doing here is we're simply saying if, and again, you've got access to the entire view that they're in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for our specific data source if they have it. And if they do, what we're going to do is we're just going to basically insert a customer note in the valid from. We're going to make up a valid to date to be like an hour from there. and then give them the opportunity to actually alter that as well. Okay, so let's see that in action. So we're going to publish this. And we're going to start our graphical scheduler. Okay, here we can see our example anything tree in there. So now we're going to create a new view, and we're going to call this example customer notes. We can see it added that default production order routing line, and we're going to choose add a data source. Okay, and now what we can see is we can see our example customer notes. So this is coming from, if we follow this through, this is coming from the option for the onCollect Easy config, and this is where we get to give what we want it to be called to the user, and if they choose that, what that means for the data code unit, the tree code unit, which table they're trying to connect to, which cell template, tooltip, all of that. All right, so let's head back into Graphical Scheduler. We're now going to choose that option, and now we see the anything provider popping open with everything filled in for us, right, that we care about. So we can see that the tree code unit was provided, the capacity number was provided. We can see that we're allowing write changes, and if we expand that, we can also see those write rules. All right, so the fields that are all coming in automatically, these are all coming in from the get suggested fields. Right, so this is the customer number, the valid from, the valid to. And these are the write rules. So this is when we inserted the data source, it decided to help us out and say that we do want to allow writes. And by the way, when you're writing, we're going to allow changing the date and time for that customer note. Okay, so let's see that in action. Let's remove this extraneous production order routing line, and we will take a look at our customer notes. Okay. So we see our customer notes, and again, remember when you install it, we have some example code that's going to be creating some random, well, pseudo-random data that's going to have this data. So it's just going to find 5 customers and make some random data for this kind of information. So here's our customer notes, and we can see our customer on the left-hand side. We can see our tooltip and our cell template. And that's it, right? So, you know, we didn't need to write any of this code for it to work, right? At the end of the day, this is still just a custom table that we're putting in here. But you can see how with a few events, how it can make it a little bit easier, especially if you're trying to, say, embed the graphical scheduler into your own app, or if you want to use the graphical scheduler with your own table or some other table that's in the system, and you want to kind of help along the configuration for that, right? So you can do that by, you know, making it easier on the user for the data source, right? You can add in your own option here, and then that helps you basically pre-configure everything, which is what we just saw. And if you don't want to do that, or if you want to work with just the fields, then you can have it such that if they're putting in the table number, you can just suggest the fields that you want to put in. And then likewise, if you know that it's always going to be a specific use case for, say, like writing, for dragging and dropping. So in my case here, maybe I don't want to allow moving a customer note between customers, because that wouldn't make logical sense for my use case, but I do want to allow dragging and dropping, then I can just allow dragging and dropping the start time and the end time. All right. So I can now drag and drop my start time and my end time. Oh, and then we see our other extension, which is the auditing one. So we're going to say, why are you changing this? Well, I'm changing this because, and then we can see how it's dropped that event. Now what we're also going to do is we're now going to explore clicking in an empty spot. So let's choose clicking on an empty spot. And this is that handle page empty click event. So if we head back into our code unit, right at the end, and we have the date time as an option for where they clicked, and now we just get to choose who does this apply to. So we could say that this applies to perhaps, let's choose a new customer. We'll choose this customer, and we'll just say that this is interesting times. And that's basically it, right? So, and there's our new data that we just created in the system. Now again, if you use the show details, then we can see the on conditional card page being used to help figure out which card page we should be picking. But that's it. It's pretty straightforward. Now, you didn't need any of this to actually work with your custom table, because as we've seen earlier, you can just connect the anything provider to any table in your system, and this would be a really good candidate, right? It's got a date, it's got something you want to group by, and it has something that you want to plot in the middle, right? So pretty common use case, but you can also help the system along to make it flow a little bit smoother for a human, right? And examples of where you might use that would be something like the pick assignments if you're making a tool such as this, right? So the pick assignments are just part of Graphical Scheduler, but you could, embed the Graphical Scheduler just like we're doing here and start it under a specific view, add your own actions, and you'll notice here, we're not asking the user for anything at all. We just started the view and everything's pre-configured to what we need, right? But if you were to take a look at the Graphical Scheduler inside of our view, we're actually going to see the pick assignments, right? And we can see that, it's got a data source and it's still configurable exactly like Graphical Scheduler. It's showing the warehouse activity headers. It's using a tree. It's suggesting to use warehouse employees. Like all of this is configured automatically when you start it, right? So these would be good examples of how you can actually use these events to build something like that for your own per tenant extension. All right, so that concludes the examples inside of here. If you do have any questions, reach out and we can do our best to help you out.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content and remember to hit that bell icon to stay updated. See you in the next video.